Hey everybody, and welcome back to another RCT scenario playthrough. We are continuing our series of going through the original game scenarios, trying to play them with a little more of a realistic feel, and seeing what we can get into. So this is scenario number 11. This is Millennium Mines. We've got to get 800 guests by the end of year 3, which on the surface isn't terribly challenging, although we will find that it rains pretty much every couple of months in this scenario, and that does put a little bit of a damper on our thrill rides at times. I was also asked in Twitch chat at the very beginning to do this with pay on entry rather than pay per ride, which is my typical preferred method. So we're going to give that a little bit of a try as well and see how it goes. So starting here, we want to start with the carousel, as we always do. And I put it not right up close to the entrance, but instead on like a platform in the middle of or a plateau, I guess, in the middle of the area. We've got this whole basically abandoned mine to work with. A train that has a terrible layout, as you know, my dislike of elevation changes on trains, so we're going to be messing with that here a little bit later. But I started with this like double bridge across the train station, and then this sort of plaza with a little mine theming in there. There's zero landscaping inside the park boundary to begin with, and it's all just kind of dirt and these wood sidewalls. But I wanted to introduce some little bits of bushes and kind of scrubby type landscaping, and we'll add some pine trees later that kind of bring in some of the outdoor or the outside the park stuff here into the main plot that we're working with. But I wanted to create a little bit of a plaza here with a couple of rides to cluster around and some food areas and things like that. So started with that scrambler, did the carousel, and now we're going to look at this first wooden coaster. The entrance here is kind of down in this valley, and immediately I wanted to put something over top of it, whether it was a pathway or what, and it kind of makes sense to do a wooden coaster. You know, the initial thought here was maybe we do 2 wooden coasters in this park, but that didn't end up panning out. We just did this one, so it's more of a family-sized coaster. Fits with the money we've got to work with here initially, but I wanted that kind of little speed hill over top of the entrance, and then I was planning to just turn it around and bring it back, but it seems that we can use the terrain a little bit to our advantage and add a diagonal in there. As I always say, diagonals really do add so much to a coaster layout. So we'll dump a station there on the end just so that we can get the ghost train running, so that we can at least see what our pacing looks like. And it's not too bad, you know, it's not a huge drop. I don't actually know if it's even big enough to pass any of the stat penalties and that sort of thing, but as I've said plenty of times, I don't care about stats, so we are really just building it for the layout. So trying now for the turnaround rather than where it was initially going to be, of this kind of nice little double up and turn around there. It actually works fairly nicely to align everything together. Always nice when that works out. And now trying to figure out kind of what this return run looks like. Do we kind of mimic the same shape of that first hill, or do we do something a little bit different? I thought for a while it would be nice to cross over in front of the first drop, like over top of it, but it really didn't work out. We'd have to be, because we're right up next to it, we'd have to be kind of so high up off the ground it didn't really make a lot of sense, and it would kind of dominate the area. And the last thing you really want is your final track into the brakes dominating over top of your first drop and kind of like the highlight of the ride. So in the end we went with a similar design for the hill over top, so it's going to share that same hill, sort of like Ravine Flyer 2 at Waldemere. So we've got that kind of similar vibe to it. And then we went with the diagonal brakes, and I make comments every now and then about wanting to play this series kind of as vanilla as possible, and yet you will see me use things like diagonal brakes. So there's definitely a little bit of a pick and choose mentality to that. I generally have kept this as vanilla as kind of I feel like is good, so I'm not using station covers, I'm not using the scenery from 2 or whatever that may be, but I do use the brakes, and really that's just because if I didn't have the brakes, I'd probably still put in the diagonal brake run. You know, for years and years and years, we as a community would still use diagonal brake runs. There just wasn't any brakes on it, so the train would kind of speed through and hit the next corner and kind of look a little silly, but at the same time, it's what you did because it simulated it well enough, and I'd rather have the simulation of it than I would have a slow train. So just got to think about it like that, and for me, the diagonal breaks are an easy one. Like, I'm not going to use the new elements on a lot of the coasters. I'm not going to use the banked corners and all that, at least through the original series. So, that's that's my balance, I suppose. So we got 2 trains running, made the station long enough so we can get 6 cars on there. I do appreciate having the capacity, so this could have probably done 5 cars if we really wanted to, but in the end it's not really a huge difference, and I'll take the extra 4 passengers, although we're not charging for rides. We will go ahead and throw in a photo section here a little bit later. I don't like using the photo sections just because they're really, really ugly, but at the same time, it's not a bad idea to have one just to have that extra income when you're only dealing with having guests come in through the entrance for your kind of bulk of your revenue. So I go back down here and add in a little bit of plaza in the valley, just sort of an entry statement. That was always sort of the intention, but I wanted to get the park going first. And we'll use these, the crazy paving, I guess, this cobblestone, or for all of our kind of plaza areas. So it just kind of sets it apart very nicely. I like using different kinds of pathway tile, or just pathway types, but it can get messy if you use too many in too many different ways, so we're going to keep it relatively simple here, and I'm just going to use 2. I'm going to use the dirt path for all of the kind of general walkways, and then I'm going to use this cobblestone for the kind of plaza type spaces. So nice little plaza there, a little water feature too, just give it a good entry feature at least. Put a swinging ship up here by the scenery. Figure we might as well take advantage of as much of the scenery as is existing. Just, it's basically free stuff, and while the scenery doesn't really make a difference in this game, at least it kind of has a nice look to it. So we'll stick that swinging ship right up next to it and kind of create this little walkway there. Dead end at the moment, although the intention is that eventually it will become connected. I don't know if we're going to do that. We might still do that a little bit later. And then landscape a little bit up here, add some flowers, add some of these kind of scrub bushes and things of that nature. So now we get into our kind of first really big, interesting track ride, and we're going to remove pretty much all of this railway for this. One of the things that I thought of coming into this map is that I was going to just replace the railway just kind of one for one with like a mine train ride or something, and not necessarily use it as a coaster, but use it as sort of a just kind of tracked dark ride sort of thing, like Calico Mine Ride at Knott's Berry Farm. But in the end, I thought, it doesn't necessarily work super well in the base game, so we're just going to leave that alone. But we do need to get rid of all this, climbing and hills and everything else, just because the speed of the train just looks stupid, and it just, I don't know, it's not my, as everyone knows, because I say it almost every stream, I don't like hills on my transport rides. So as that, we removed kind of first section here, and we're going to put a rapids in its place. So the nice thing is, because we've already got this kind of great pit carved out, it kind of works super well for this like flooded mine sort of theme. So we'll route this rapids kind of through all this existing stuff. Not really doing a whole lot of modification to the terrain. I like to see my rapids ride sunk down into the landscape a little bit. It's a little bit weird when you're not using hacks, because you can't, really make it clean with the water kind of raised up over top of the thing, so it just feels like it's part of a whole lake in some instances and all that. And it's a little bit rough around the edges maybe, but I'm just, in the US you don't see very many rapids rides raised up out of the ground, and in Europe you don't really see that either as much. There's a few exceptions, but it's not really my favorite thing, so I try and lower them into the ground as best as I can, or at least kind of give the illusion that it's part of the landscape as a whole. So we'll put our entrance and our exit on kind of the back side here, and kind of work our way up out of this pit, and then up into the existing little bridge there that's crossing over, and then our station we're going to put on the same side too. I don't like same side stations typically, more so on coasters where it kind of matters a little bit more, but here with the water ride, it's fine. It's not, I don't think it's really a detriment in either way. But it does allow us to create a nice little plaza here on that side of the bridge, put a centerpiece of mine theming in there, and we are good to go. So I wanted to flood this bottom area, not just as the reservoir, but also just because I kind of thought it would look cool from a theming perspective. So this is another one of those kind of reverse sort of things where you have the lift at the end, which, you know, as a rider, it's not really my favorite because it's sort of anticlimactic, but it also gets you started pretty exciting right off the bat, where you go into a tunnel, drop down, and then you're kind of dropping all the way down through all the way to the reservoir down there at the bottom, and then you get some waterfalls and stuff afterwards, which I think is kind of cool. So, you know, it's a balance, I guess. We get our info kiosk, so we'll stick that in here as well and put some more flowers and things. We are going to use the expensive umbrella trick on this one because it is raining a whole heck of a lot, and the revenue is good. You know, it's definitely helpful. And think about it this way: you know, most theme parks in the U.S., you're not going to get an umbrella for under that anyway. So we're gonna skew our economy here a little bit and charge the full amount, but I think that's okay. So drop one there in the plaza as well, so we have a good coverage of everything. And then now kind of thinking what is next. We've got our few track rides so far. Got a really good park started, so we can charge a decent amount at the entrance, and it also gives us some time to clean up a little bit and put in some of these seating areas and trash cans and stuff like that, and also some of these trees, just because I want at least a little bit of greenery in there. It's very easy to look at this map and just kind of build the whole thing without any of it, just because that's how it was set up initially. But it's not far-fetched to think that either the park could plan this over time and properly landscape it, or that some of these areas are just getting kind of reclaimed by nature and there's bushes just naturally. It's just kind of part of it, I think. So thinking through our next move, I think it wants to be a coaster, and it kind of wants to use this space alongside the Rapids ride. So thinking through here, but we got a little bit distracted, and we're going to instead look at maybe a car ride in here, because I was looking at this kind of crossing of landscape and tunnels and things with the Rapids ride, and we have this kind of like really great little area set up already to go for a car ride. We have the trucks, so it kind of feels like it needs to go in because it fits the overall theme, and there's not too many rides right now that kind of very clearly fit this overall theme. So we're going to start here, and we're going to start in the middle. I very rarely start my rides with a station, because I always try and build them either at the focal point or at whatever the thing is that I'm trying to really key in on. So right here, it was this sort of bridge and route that kind of keyed me into maybe wanting to do a car ride initially. So we're going to start here, and then we're going to kind of go forwards and backwards and figure it out from there. So a little bit of what we're doing is kind of this terrain management, and we've got some of these pretty sheer cliff walls that I want to reduce a little bit by kind of terracing the overall landscape on that side, and it also helps us to really make the car ride feel fairly streamlined into the space. I also wanted a little crossover too, so it's add some interest into the ride. We got to climb our way out of this whole thing, so it's a pretty long ride for one, and it also has some fairly good elevation change, which a lot of the car rides that I do don't have a lot of elevation change, just by the very nature of I'm putting them on flat ground, and I don't really love the look of the car ride floating kind of high up above the landscape. I kind of like it sitting on the ground at all times. But in this instance, we've got the terrain to work with, so we might as well, and it gives us a good instance to really build this up a little bit. So we're going to do that, and then kind of raise up here to close our loop at the end. And there we go. I don't know why yellow is a default color for this one. It's kind of a weird choice, but we're going to change that to something a little more brown initially. And we definitely did go fairly heavy on the brown on this one because it does kind of lend itself to it, just that part of the theme. Although, as New Element loves to say, brown is not a theme, but the theming is mine, so the mine theming is brown, so I think we're all right. So, finished with the ride itself. Got to bring in the pathway, so kind of go up and around and sort of prep to eventually create a loop around this Rapids ride and kind of the larger park as a whole. Lots of fences here. We've got a fairly large amount of just kind of sheer cliffs. So from a park safety standpoint, you definitely don't want your guest falling into the cliff because that will end poorly. So instead, we're going to throw a bunch of fences in here, and in general, as I always say, fences are basically your easiest theming, so it gives us some opportunity to add some interest and add some stuff, and slowly creep up that excitement rating in some of these rides. Not that it really makes a huge difference, but it can. So I think it's a fairly interesting car ride, probably one of the more interesting ones we've done in this series so far. Also gives the opportunity to throw in a little bit of the bushes for a bit of greenery in there. Just adds that extra color and gives it a little bit of pop and some interest through the whole thing. So we've now got a couple rides here nicely intertwined into it. I'm going to fix the visibility of that platform on the train in Tile Inspector. I don't know why it's glitching a little bit and not showing those up, but it's been doing that for a little while, so I'm not sure if that's I'm sure it's a known issue, but if it's being actively fixed or what. But anyway, so now that we built that car ride, we get back to our original intent, which was to build a coaster over here. So I thought about a Zierer, as with most of these junior coasters we've been doing, and that's what the track is based off of in the first place. So I love the old school Tivoli custom Zierers that just kind of meander all around and kind of go every which way around to space, interact with other rides, go through tunnels, have multiple lifts, things like that. So originally I intended to make this thing a multi-lift coaster, and once again we started right in the middle, but as we get through this a little further, we're actually only going to end up doing one lift, but it's going to be right in the middle of the ride. So we're going to take a page out of the Rapids ride there that we did earlier and do this sort of interesting type layout. So I've got the lift there, as you can already see. We're going to do a little bit of revised work on that, but this figure 8 worked fairly nicely, and we're building backwards right now, so just trying to kind of see where it goes. And I didn't necessarily have a plan in mind going into this initially, just that I wanted that kind of helix around, or not even helix, but just turn around that water feature there with the fountain and everything. So I thought, okay, well, that works, but where's it going to go from there? So we ended up kind of working backwards and took all the way up to the top here, which made sense from an access standpoint, and thought, all right, that's a cool start to the ride. So you get a pretty quick, peppy start to the ride, nice drop into a tunnel. One of the problems was that the lift hill that I had is taking at a fairly huge speeds because, well, obviously it's at the bottom of the whole drop sequence. So I didn't necessarily want to go do that quite straight away. So as we're looking at a few different options here, we need to move the train. If you guys remember the Diamond Heights stream, where we kept closing the train over and over and over and over again, I think we might break the record for that on this one, because I kept rearranging this railroad 100 times. But it's just part of it, and it makes sense to do it kind of as we go. So the solution for the speed there is to put a little bit of a hill before that lift hill, and here is our one and only lift hill that's kind of halfway through the ride. So we're going to drop off and go down into this pit one more time, because I didn't necessarily want to end it. It's a fairly short ride as it turns out right now, so wanted to add a little bit more interest. So we'll have this kind of dip off of the top here and then drop underneath the railroad again, which we're going to adjust one more time. There we go. And then we'll do a little bit of a layout down here, trying to utilize the existing scenery again, just to keep it already themed. I mean, we already have this free theming, so we might as well. So I'm trying not to actively build through any of the themed elements. So like right here, we're building around this little hut, and we'll try and use that with the queue as well. But if it comes down to it and theming has to go, then it's okay. But in general, it's kind of a fun challenge, I guess, to try and avoid existing theming and use it as a feature, because it's very tempting sometimes to get in here and just kind of clear cut everything. It's like when we take a scenario that's got existing rides, because sometimes you just want to demolish the rides just straight up, take the money and build your own thing. But I think there's part of fun in trying to be clever about how the other existing rides sit in the space, how we can modify those rides to fit a little better, and just it gives an extra layer of challenge, whereas the scenario goals for these aren't really that tough. It does add kind of a bit of a fun wrinkle to the overall effort. So here we go. We've got a relatively completed layout, and we can put our brake run in on this. While I could run 3 trains, we're just going to do 2 here initially. Don't really have a big enough brake run for 3. We could have added it, but I don't think we really need to. This park doesn't seem like it's going to be in the market for 3 train operations, just based on its overall size. So trying to now route a pathway all the way over to this space. This is going to become part of our pathway loop, because we always want to think about the path in terms of kind of where it's eventually going to go, and eventually I want to have a full circle, since that makes the most sense just from a peep wayfinding standpoint. So we're actually going to drop the path underneath of the station, which if you use path and not queue is kind of nice because it doesn't remove the station supports. So I think it kind of has a neat little look to it, sort of a covered space there. And then we'll put our station here using some of this existing terrain, and we'll raise some other sections here. So you're kind of queuing in through this little bit of a pit and tunnel here and there just to give it a little bit of interest. Gonna put our exit here as well. Gonna lower this down to our lower level. Fairly decent size ride too, especially for what is ostensibly a family coaster, but I think it's a fairly fun one, and I like the way that Zierer does family coasters now, where it's something that, yeah, it's a family coaster, but my coaster enthusiast isn't going to hate it either. You know, it'll be a good time. So lower some of these sections where the track was dragging on the ground. As we know, I don't like track on the ground typically, so we're going to lower those so we create a little bit of supporting. And now I'm looking at what this is going to take to bring this path all the way around. So we got to get underneath of that drop on the Zierer there and kind of work our way all the way around. I was initially going to connect over to the swinging ship, but I didn't necessarily want to go all the way around that and have some pathway that was fairly high up off the ground. So instead what we're going to do is, again, use this existing theming here, create a nice backdrop, and connect it over to our main plaza. So connect the last 2 little bits here. And there we go. So now we have a full circle within our park. So good layout now, so guests can come from either side and make it all the way around. So we'll less lost guests and all that kind of thing. Add in all of our trash cans and benches and that sort of thing. I always kind of forget to add those in and then end up just going back and spamming a whole bunch of them through. So we will make sure that we do that this time. I didn't really hire a lot of handymen this time either, which didn't really need to. We didn't have too many dirty pathways, but it's always something that I forget to do as well, because I try and start with a fairly skeleton crew at the beginning, because I really don't need to be spending money on staff wages. I want money to go straight into the park. So 1 handyman, 1 mechanic, the basic minimum at the very beginning, so I just always want to make sure that I'm paying good attention to that. So now we have our log flume, which also kind of fits well into this like flooded mine concept. And again, we'll use the other rides here as some interaction points, and I think it fits well into this space. It didn't feel fully kind of fleshed out with just the Zierer coaster there, so I think I knew I needed something into the place, and there was a little sort of natural valley here with this bridge across on the pathway that just kind of felt like it needed to hold a drop of some kind, and the log flume drop made the most sense. So here we go, modifying the train once again, and we will do that here. And then we get our log flume started. We got our drop coming down into that splash area that's sort of recessed down in. It wasn't quite working out initially because of the train, so once again, train closes down. Hopefully nobody's really wanting to ride this thing. And there we go. So the flume layout is sort of meandering. Well, it's definitely meandering. It's trying to go around and kind of connect to some of these areas while generally following existing terrain, which we're doing. So I think it works fairly well while not feeling totally forced. We can build backwards from our drop right here and create a little sort of upper area to work with. Add the photo booth in there as well, just so we can get a little bit of income. And then I always kind of like using these reverser turntables. The old mock water or log flumes use them fairly extensively, and I never really put them on my rides kind of back in the day. I didn't want the main drop to go backwards, so I did it for just kind of the lift hill there, which typically when you're using reverse sections on the flume, it kind of makes sense to do like a mid drop, like kind of a medium sized one, and then come back later and turn it back around for the big drop. But we didn't have that here. It's just the one lift and the one drop, so we'll make do with something of this kind of nature. So now it's trying to get this queue out of here, and as we're doing so, I'm running into all sorts of clearance issues. The coaster is a little bit lower than I kind of realized it was, I suppose. So instead we're thinking about how we can kind of redo this, and I keep eyeing this mine hut here in the middle of this coaster helix and thinking, maybe we can bring it around there and again highlight some existing scenery and make it a little more interesting. So we're going to add a couple of tunnels here, a couple of trenches, and there we go. And now we can kind of rearrange this whole plaza just to create a plaza, I guess. It's kind of some dead space right now, so we'll just take that and kind of rework it slightly to fit our lowered queue here. Again, using our different pathway materials for the plaza. Creates a nice little placemaking right there. And there we go, connecting the queue up to that couple of pathways there, and then we'll reconnect our exit up to there as well. So I'm pretty happy with how these rides all turned out, sort of kind of intertwined, like not totally stacked on top of each other and not super, super tight, but at the same time it still has that kind of nice shared space vibe to it. I always like parks that do that. The sharing ride space tends to be more expensive just because you're having to deal with existing rides and footers and conduit and all sorts of other utilities and things like that. So it's not exactly the easiest to work with, so that's why I always appreciate when parks in real life do it. We have no such worries here in RCT, so we can kind of do what we want. I did have this great overlook here that we've been kind of building up with the flume going through it and the rapids underneath and the Zierer cutting through the middle of it, but it seemed like it was just kind of screaming out for a little cafe. So put the food booth there, put the fries booth, or the drinks stand, I guess, and then a little bit of seating area up there. I probably should have done that in the cobblestone paving as well, but in the end, it's fine. But man, that would be a heck of a view and a great place to sit and eat a little snack. So here we are checking how much guests are carrying in so we can appropriately size our entrance fee so nobody's turning around, but we should be able to charge the max now, which is somewhere around $55. So we just got to keep the guests coming through to keep making money. We're not really making money hand over fist as we start to do here with this many rides if it was pay per ride. So instead we're going to have to watch what we're spending a little bit. Now I'm doing a fair bit of theming work and terrain modification and things like that, although the terrain modification was fairly cheap. I think it was like $5 per thing, which is not totally awful. But that's where we're going to wrap it up for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode as we get into this. This was not always my favorite scenario, but I think I've gotten a little bit better appreciation for the thing. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and we will have part 2 here coming up where we finish the map a little later. So until next time, thank you all very much for watching, and have a great day. Bye now.